Hello everyone, welcome to this Conserving Twinflower, Why It Takes Community presentation for Fall into Nature. We've had a fair few days of it now, so it's lovely to see all these folks again. I've seen a few familiar faces from yesterday's Waxcap talk, which was really fascinating. If you've missed any of the talks in this Fall into Nature presentation, by the way, I think they're all going up on YouTube at some point on the Plantlife YouTube, so check that out afterwards, perhaps in a few weeks' time. But that Waxcap one, thoroughly recommend, really interesting. Anyway, for those who didn't see me yesterday, I'm Sam, the community scientist for the Rare Plants and Wild, excuse me, Rare Plants and Wild Connections project up in the Cairngorms. And as you can see, Keilidih, the project manager, is going to be doing our talk today. I'll get into introduction in a moment. Welcome to the Fall into Nature series, a series of online talks with an autumnal theme with training opportunities and ways to keep in touch here with us at Plantlife. Plantlife is a conservation charity dedicated to the conservation of wildflowers, plants and fungi across the UK and more widely as well. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Today we're here to talk about twinflower restoration. So as I said, I'm part of the project. I know a little bit about twinflower, I've been working on it, but Keilidih here is really the expert. So she's going to be giving us the full rundown on what's going on with twinflower conservation here in the Cairngorms, and how people are involved in it, how the community is involved in it, and perhaps how you could get involved in it too if you're so inclined. So as mentioned, Keilidih is the project manager of the Rare Plants Wild Connections project. She manages all aspects of the project, from rare mountaintop habitats to species-rich meadows and to pine wood restoration, where the twinflower comes in. So a bit of Zoom admin, stuff like that. At the end, we'll do questions. So please do post any questions that you have, not in the chat, but in the Q&A channel. You'll see there's a link to the Q&A channel in the bar on Zoom. It can be quite hard for me to keep track of chat. So if you post it in there, there's a good chance I might not be able to, I might not spot it or be able to bring it up when we need it. So if you can put it in Q&A, then I can actually go and acknowledge them. We can text type them if it's a technical thing as well. So thank you very much. We'll read them out at the end. So we'll have the presentation at the end. We'll have a bit of time for questions. We also have a general chat, which some of you already noticed. So feel free to just, everyone can post in there for discussions and anything you want to, just general mattering stuff. Welcome to comment or anything like that in there. Yeah, everyone's been automatically muted and cameras are off, so no need to worry about that. It's just me and Keilidih who'll be able to see for this. As mentioned, this is being recorded along with all the others, and yes, it will hopefully go up on YouTube at some point soon. I'll also be posting links to useful resources in the chat, so there's a couple of things in there already. So feel free to keep an eye on that for anything that might interest you as well. Yeah, I think that's about it for my intro. So I think we're more or less ready for Keilidih's presentation now on conserving twinflower. Yeah, thanks very much for joining us today, folks. Looking forward to it. One moment while we just sort out the sharing. Cool.
Great. Well, I think, does that look all okay for you, Sam, there?
Yeah, and that's good. Hopefully everyone else can see that just fine. So I think you're good to go ahead.
Great.
Presentation's up.
Perfect. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Keilidih, and I'm really pleased to be talking about the big actions being taken for one of our smallest native wildflowers today. So I thought we could start by getting familiar with our focus species of the day, which is twinflower that we've got here, or Linnea borealis. So as you can see here, it has two beautiful bell-shaped flowers on a thin forked stem. And although it might look tall and mighty up close here, the stems do only stand at around 10 centimeters tall, so they're really quite small. The common name for the species might be quite obvious based on its shape and matching flowers. However, there is a lovely story behind its scientific name. So Carl Linnaeus, who we have here, invented the modern two-part naming conventions that we give all living organisms today. And it's said that he took a particular shining to this tiny little flower, and so it was named in his honor. And borealis, on the other hand, pays reference to the distribution of the plants. That's across the boreal regions of North America, Europe, and Asia. And some of the best times to see these delicate little nodding flower heads is between June and July, often into August. So sadly, we're a little bit beyond that point now, though even outside of the flowering season, Twinflower still has an awful lot to offer. So it's actually a perennial evergreen dwarf shrub, and each plant consists of an extensive branching network of shoots which creep and crawl across the forest floor, forming these lush green mats, which can be seen at any time of the year. They can blend in quite well with the likes of bilberry or blaeberry, if you're Scots, and other foliage. But once you get an eye in for the species, these mats really are quite a sight to behold. So each shoot consists of a reddish woody stem that we can see here, with oval leaves that also grow in opposite pairs, just like our flower heads. And as the plant can grow vegetatively in this way, one plant can actually grow considerably in size and extent. So both of these images here are showing shoots from just one plant and from a relatively small patch as well, just to give a feel of how extensive they can actually grow to. So now we know what to look for. Where might we find our twinflower hiding? Well, they grow best in moderate shade, predominantly in the understory of conifer forests. It's mostly associated with the remnants of native pine forests, but does also grow in older plantations of mature pines where the right levels of shade can be maintained. So often being favourable to a little bit of light disturbance, twinflower can often be found growing in track edges, clearings, and even through old extraction routes within the woods. But outside of this environment, they can occasionally be found on north-facing slopes where there's really no tree coverage, which can be quite surprising. But here, things like boulders, other shrubs are providing those right levels of shade for the plant. So the last image on the right here shows one of the sites we recently visited where twinflower was growing really quite happily amongst some juniper shrubs that provided that nice level of shade for them. There's a few other elements of these habitats that twinflower is favourable to as well. So it grows best in open, mossy areas and amongst a species called glittering wood moss or Hylocomium splendens. And this moss helps to retain the right levels of moisture for the plant without creating too damp an environment for it. Twinflower also grows among dwarf shrubs, such as bilberry or blaeberry and cowberry. And there's also a number of wildflowers that can be indicators of suitable habitat for twinflower, as they require similar conditions, such as chickweed wintergreen, wood sorrel, common cowwheat, and various other wintergreen species as well. So although twinflower can be found in abundance elsewhere, in Europe in particular, in the UK, it is confined solely to Scotland and has become nationally scarce due to the clearance of native woodlands. So twinflower can be favourable to light disturbances, as we said, although things like clear felling can completely remove twinflower from a site. It's just far too much disturbance for it to survive. While on the other hand, undermanagement can be an equal threat, whereby twinflower can be overwhelmed by competition from other dwarf shrubs and heather. And without that space to spread its network of shoots along the forest floor, patches can begin to shrink in size until it's fully outcompeted. It's also at risk as well from the deliberate thickening of forests, which can lead to severe overshading for the plant and just not providing the right light levels for it to survive. So because of these changes in management practices that we've seen over quite a wide space of time, twinflower has really struggled, and patches of the species had now become so isolated from each other that their distances are often too far apart for pollinators to travel between patches. So as a result, most of the remaining patches that we have are unable to set seed, which would have previously enabled the plant to spread more widely through a wood, by clinging on to animals and falling off as they walk through the woodland. But instead, the plants are only able to spread vegetatively, which leaves them vulnerable to things like competition and also disease as well. But it's not all doom and gloom for our little twinflower. Research has shown that if we are able to reintroduce genetic diversity back into that mix and reconnect these patches that have become so isolated, we'll be able to provide a good chance of them flowering once again, being pollinated, and eventually rebuilding the strength of their seed set. So translocation is the main method that's now been tried and tested through various projects in Scotland with a really high success rate. And this involves introducing twinflower material from unique patches into an area, either to create a new patch in itself or to help boost an existing patch by adding that extra variety around it. So how exactly does translocation work? Well, we like to think of it as matchmaking for plants. So by collecting a variety of plant materials or cuttings from a number of existing unique patches and planting them together within close proximity of each other in a new area with optimum growing conditions for twinflower, these will eventually grow to form one new genetically unique twinflower patch in itself. So if we imagine all of these photographs of various patches that we've got here are spread across multiple woodlands, quite a distance apart. It's the bringing together of material from each of these and planting them into one new area of woodland. So with that strong genetic makeup, this new population has a really high chance of flowering and setting seed, whereas previously separate patches were likely struggling. So in time, and with enough of these reintroduced populations becoming established, it's hoped that twinflower might be able to become self-sustaining once again. There are now examples of these reintroduced translocation patches that can be seen over 10 years since their first planting out. So from the likes of the first Cairngorms Rare Plants project, which was a partnership between the National Park Authority, Nature Scott and the University of Aberdeen. It was one of the first to trial this in the National Park, and that ran from 2010 to 2013. So this involved some of the first trials, but really it's showcased how well the introduced material can take to a new area and spread under the right conditions. So 10 plus years on, from cuttings, this square here, transplant section, has now become a really dense mat of twinflower, which has spread well out with its original boundary there. So this photograph was taken outside of the flowering season, but many of these patches that are now 10 plus years on are now flowering and starting to record some seed set within them as well. So they've been really successful. Which brings us on to our own project here at Plantlife, the Cairngorms Rare Plants and Wild Connections project. So as Sam mentioned a little bit at the intro, we're working with land managers, local communities, organisations and visitors to the National Park to save and support some of our rarest wild plant populations and habitats. And twinflower is one of our key focus species. So the project's been running since 2020 and will continue on until spring 2024. And it's funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the Cairngorms National Park Authority, and is supported as well by Nature Scott. So during this time, we'll be working across quite a wide variety of areas in the park, which includes species-rich grasslands, Arctic alpine habitats within the Cairngorms Mountains, but also predominantly focusing on pinewood species. So for our twinflower in particular, we're looking to establish 5 new populations through targeted reintroductions, which will help to reconnect the species across the landscape. Now, we're a small team of just 2, which is made up of myself and Sam, And this is because we really wanted to involve the community as much as we could in helping to make a difference for Twinflower through this project. So it really is a community effort that we're helping to facilitate. So why focus on the Cairngorms? Well, the Cairngorms National Park encompasses the most extensive tracts of Caledonian pine forest in Britain, and is a stronghold for many rare plant species, including our little twinflower. So in fact, there are 2 core strongholds for twinflower within the park, and they're reflected within the pinewood areas of Strathspey, which we can see here on the map near Granton and Spey, moving downwards towards Newtonmore, and on Dee side, which follows the River Dee through the likes of Braemar to the east. So at the heart of these strongholds lies a number of towns and villages that are able to enjoy having these wonderful botanical rarities on their doorstep, while visitors often flock here in the summer months to enjoy the rich diversity of wildlife and walks that the park has to offer. So we've been working with both those living locally and those visiting the park to help make a difference for Twinflower, and have come a really long way so far thanks to their support since the beginning of the project. So what's been done so far then? Well, since we started in 2020, we've been working with the community on every aspect possible for Twinflower translocation, from the surveying of the health of existing plots to collecting Twinflower material, growing on cuttings from home, preparing cuttings for planting out, and conducting habitat walkover surveys to find the best possible spots for new Twinflower patches. So today I'm going to tell a few stories from those that have been joining us out in the field to shine a spotlight on the people making this all possible. So starting with the collection of plant materials. As I mentioned before, genetic diversity is key to creating a new, strong, healthy twinflower patch. And so it's been essential that we visit as many existing populations across the park to collect materials from. And these collections have involved gently lifting small sections of twinflower shoot by hand up to 40 centimeters in length, and really ensuring that roots remain intact with at least one set of well-developed roots attached to the plant there. So as you can see here from the middle picture, it's actually even quite quite hard to see here because they're really quite so thin. But twinflower roots are really thin and fragile, and they don't actually grow terribly deep. They stay quite close to the surface as such. And so we knew from very early on in the project that we wanted to grow on these materials from home to help them establish as good a root system as possible, and to really see them grow in size before planting them out to hopefully help provide the strongest chance of survival for them. So previous translocation efforts have successfully trialled both growing on cuttings and direct transplant methods, which is where materials are uprooted and planted on the same day or within a few days of collection. But by choosing to grow on from home, though it takes quite a long time, this has meant that we've been able to collect really the minimum amount of material needed and have as little impact as possible on existing populations. So it's also meant that we've been able to collect samples from even the smallest patches, even those that have been struggling slightly because we're not having that dramatic impact on them, which in a way is giving that genetic patch a second life elsewhere, so helping extend its lifespan, but through a different patch with hopefully slightly better habitat conditions for it to really take. So one of the sites that we've been working on is at Glentanner. So Glentanner is an estate and a national nature reserve in the heart of Deeside, so that's on the eastern edge of the Cairngorms. And with extensive areas of woodland, Glentanner is actually home to a number of unique twinflower populations scattered throughout the reserve and the wider estate. though many of these have sadly become quite isolated. So when you see a full map, it's really a sprinkling of them quite far apart. And last year, we aimed to collect a few cuttings from every one of these patches on the estate to help eventually create a new dynamic twinflower patch that could help bridge the gap between some of those more fragmented areas. The main challenge, however, was the sheer scale of the landscape. It's a very large estate, so getting from one edge to the other can take quite a lot of time, and obviously a lot of the paths are up forestry tracks, so it's quite hard going underfoot in some areas. So volunteers joined us throughout the summer walking on foot, mostly across the estate to collect cuttings, but one particular twinflower patch needed a completely different approach. With the furthest patch of twinflower at Linn of Tanner, around 15 kilometres away from the visitor centre, it just wouldn't be possible to walk there and back, collect the cuttings and plant them into trays in the same day, all in the space of a working day. So we had to put a special request out to members of the public to help us make this journey. And we were really lucky. We had two very keen mountain bikers that stepped up to the challenge and heard the shout out. And it was just fantastic. There'd been no other way to get to where we needed to get to. So we soon prepped our bikes, filled our backpacks with collection kits, and headed for the track. And I have to admit, it was quite a hard slog uphill, slow burn uphill for the majority of the way. Took us well over an hour following forest tracks on two wheels before the path became too narrow for us to go any further. And so the next leg was on foot, trekking through really quite dense heathland for a further 40 minutes before our end destination was in sight. But it was all worthwhile, as we were rewarded at the end with the sun beaming down on us at the base of the Linn of Tanner waterfall, where a twinflower creeped and crawled from the rocky edges as if reaching out towards the water itself. So cuttings collected and the urge to take a dip in the river resisted. We headed back to pot up our finds at the visitor centre. So we had to go the full 15 kilometres back the way afterwards, which is what we're trekking through here back towards the bicycles. So we were able to collect 4 cuttings that day without impacting the patch at the waterfall. Although the patch was doing well, it was quite widespread. So instead of having a dense mat of twinflower, it was more occasional shoots coming up. And so we didn't want to have too much of an impact, but really 4 was safe enough to collect without damaging what was there. So although this might not seem like a huge amount, these will be grown on to around triple in size, hopefully at least triple, before they are planted out again. And these particular cuttings have been grown on under protective cloches, which is what these little pop-up green nets are, at the Glen Tanner Visitor Centre in their tree nursery, under the watchful eye of the rangers and volunteers that have been visiting there, alongside other cuttings from the estate. So if you live nearby, do be sure to pop by and say hello. They're still there doing well at the moment, about to be repotted into bigger trays. But the rangers would be more than happy to say hello and tell you a little bit about that work as well. So over the hill to Strathspey, local volunteers have been busy growing on cuttings collected nearby and keeping a watchful eye over them themselves in their own back gardens over the last year or so. And these cuttings have actually come on so well that they've needed to be repotted into larger trays, which is what's photographed here. So they start off in really quite small trays and then move into these bigger ones. And we decided to use soils and mosses from the sites in which they will eventually be planted out to to help create a bit of a microclimate in the trays, which will help the twinflower cuttings to adjust to their new forever homes, while also providing enough space for a final boost of growth before they're planted out. So some have done so well, in fact, after the repotting, having that little bit of extra space, that they're already overflowing from the larger trays they've been planted into, which is this one at the bottom, is doing extremely well, considering that you think that came from one little kind of 30-40 centimeter cutting, and it's now this full, overflowing plant. It's doing really well. So we think that mix of the soils from the sites, having the mosses added in as opposed to being planted in compost, really helps to give them that boost of nutrients that they need. So it's been a true community effort, which has seen a wide range of people come out and join us in the field doing their part for Twinflower. From university students in the top left corner that joined us as part of their environmental sciences and geography units, to the volunteer rangers that joined us for a conservation day, and the local residents in the bottom left corner that came out to explore their nearby woodlands as part of the Cairngorms Nature Big Weekend. In total, so far for the project, and we've still got quite a way to go, but just for this first half, surveying, collecting cuttings and whatnot, we've empowered over 50 people to take action for this tiny plant and dedicated over 25 whole days to this species alone. So thanks to this, we now have a healthy network of mini twinflower nurseries and gardens across the national park, ready to be mixed and matched to create new populations. Alongside all of this, of course, we've been working closely with land managers every step of the way, so they can't go without their own shout out here. Whether it's been providing support with advice and guidance to those managing existing twinflower patches, or working closely with land managers to seek out potential new sites for twinflower to be established. It's been a real collaborative effort as well with the land managers. So what's coming next? Well, next year is our last full year of the project, and it's shaping up to be quite a busy one already. But towards the end of this year, we'll be repotting the last of our cuttings into larger trays to prepare them for planting out, so that they have a final season at the start of spring to get that last little push of growth before they're planted. And then as spring comes around, we'll be looking to plant out at the first of our new reintroduction sites. So the best time for planting out is really to avoid any harsh weather conditions. So whether that's the peak heat of summer or cold frosts of winter. And so autumn 2023 is when we'll be planning any final planting out that isn't completed in the springtime. And of course, once all the twinflower settled into its new forever final homes, we'll be looking to host some survey monitoring and training for local residents and community groups to help keep an eye on the patches closest to them as they become established and monitor the success as they develop over time. Of course, we welcome anyone to join us for these activities, as we have done for the full duration of this project. Anyone's welcome to join, whether you're just passing through, whether you're you have twinflower on your doorstep that you want to get involved in. And so if this sounds like something of interest, then please do get in touch. We have an online volunteering platform where you can easily sign up to particular activities, or just mailing us to keep up to date with what's coming up. This screenshot was taken yesterday, so we have quite a few options on there already for Twinflower, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more as we get into next year. You can also reach out to Sam, our community scientist, if you have particular questions about volunteering with us. And I'm sure Sam can pop us details in the Zoom chat if anyone would like to reach out to Sam. Or if you would like to get out and explore some twinflower by yourself in your own time, Plantlife has a number of wildflower walks available to download from our website, one of which guides you through the beautiful pine woods of Annagach Woods near Granton and Spey, and it has a number of different route options available with different lengths. We'll have the opportunity to pass nearby twinflower patches and enjoy a wide variety of plant life there as well. So we can always pop the link in the chat for that if that's of interest too. And lastly, whether you live within the national park or further afield, there are still ways you can help support this species. Now that you know what to look for, which I will share as not a lot of people know what to look for when it's not flowering as well. So it's a wee bit of a skill to have under your belt there. So now that you know what to look for, even when it's not flowering, it's really good to keep your eyes peeled out on walks while you're out and about. If you think you're in a possible suitable twin flower habitat or even not, it's really good to just keep an eye out for these things. Mostly because previously unknown twinflower patches are still being discovered. So it's possible that the species is really under-recorded, I guess because it's so small. It's quite difficult to know absolutely every spot where it's growing. So if you do ever think you've come across twinflower and would like to check it against any records, the NBN Atlas is a great place to check as a starting point. And if you think you might have found something new on your hands, you can submit records through the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland's Record a Plant forms and also reach out to one of their county recorders. Or of course, if you're in the national park, then do keep in touch with us as well. It's always great to hear of these things. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. That was a whirlwind through what's been happening to date and what we've got planned for next year, and all the ways that the community is getting involved with us here at Plantlife. So please do keep in touch and watch the space for Twinflower. We've still got lots to come next year. As I say, we're just scratching the surface at the moment with all the big planting out happening in 2023. And keep in touch through the newsletter or social media, or you can reach out to myself and Sam at all if you've got any questions. But I think for now we'll open up for any questions here on Zoom.
Cool. Thank you very much, Keilidih. That was lovely. Really, really fascinating to hear all the stuff going on with Twinflower. I'll switch us to if I can figure out how to do it through gallery view. Tell you what, I will. There we go. Now we're on gallery view. So yes, we've had a few questions through the session there. So thank you very much, folks. So I know a couple of people have already posted in there as well. So first thing that a few people have noted is, what are the species that pollinate twinflower?
All right, so it's mostly quite small flies, hoverflies, some bumblebees as well that pollinate twinflower, but it's mostly species that don't travel quite a long distance. So that's really been the issue with the fragmentation, is that they've just become too far for these species to travel. But we're still learning more about these pollinators. There's not been huge amounts of observations of the plants being pollinated, but we do know from previous research that it's really mostly species that aren't flying more than sort of 50 meters between patches. So it's really quite a short distance. We've got quite lazy pollinators, if you think of it that way. So really work's been done over time is to try and boost existing populations by creating new ones within a close proximity of existing populations and really bridging those kind of pollination gaps between them to try and overcome that. But yeah, generally flies, hoverflies, bumblebees, I think some moths as well, potentially as well.
Cool. Thank you very much. So let's see what else we've got. So there's a question about licensing, which is interesting.
Okay.
One. So presumably it's illegal to remove twinflower from the wild. First part of the question, I suppose, is that true?
It's not illegal to remove it from the wild. You do, however, need landowner permission to remove twinflower from an area. You do, however, need a formal license for the planting out of twinflower. So it's collection, as long as you've got landowner permission, really, but because it is such a rare sparse plant, I would advise strongly against anyone collecting any unless it was on under the band of a project that was looking to do translocations.
Yeah, of course. We would hope the landowners would not give permission freely to anyone who wanted to show up and take some twinflower. Cool. Yeah, and then the second part of that question, so what licenses do we need to do this sort of work, and how do you kind of convey that and make that work with communities as well? I think an interesting part of that. So I suppose communicating that this is something that is agreed by Nature Scott in this case.
Yeah, definitely. So our licenses, we work with Nature Scott is who's providing our licenses for this work, and really we've just kept the community groups and people that we're working with in the loop and been very transparent about all of our works from the get-go. So while we've been out doing collection days, during those days we really try to get across the implications of collecting there and what's required in terms of the process that we've gone through to do what we're doing. So we tend to get that across in that way. But also, like events such as this, just raising awareness of that process and how that all works.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. There's a question here that kind of links, well, two questions here that kind of link together. So have twinflower always been confined to Scotland? And then do they grow in Northumberland, or have they ever grown in Northumberland? Interesting question there. So I guess it's the extent of the pine woods is part of the answer to this, isn't it, really?
Yeah, so really it's that they've been really closely associated with Caledonian pine woods, which are mostly confined to Scotland. I guess as far as we've seen the distribution shrink in a relatively short period of time. So we assume that twinflower was once much wider spread, particularly across Scotland. But I don't know if it would have grown in the likes of Northumberland, very specific. So yeah, I'm not sure with that one. Really, my knowledge is predominantly in Scotland. But it may have been spread a little bit wider, than it is today. Again, it's that association with the types of woodland that it associates with. Yeah,
so if there's any record of historical Scots pine woodlands over quite a large area in Northumberland or other parts of the north of England, then perhaps it could have been there in the past. Obviously, it's doing very well in the Scandinavian countries, for example, where pine woodlands are very widespread. So it just depends on that sort of habitat. Cool. Yeah, so are there any competitors that can impede the twinflower growth? That's one you'll be able to answer, Keilidih.
Yes, there are. So really, it grows quite happily amongst things like blaeberry or bilberry and also cowberry. But those types of shrubs, if there isn't, there's really a fine level of grazing management on these areas. And if they aren't grown enough, then actually, if they aren't grazed enough, then actually some of these plants can really outcompete and take over. And it's the same with heather as well. And some of that can be linked to light levels too. And heather can really take over an area if it's left to it. So we've seen quite a few patches where twinflowers growing, it's managing within these areas because it's quite well established. But over time, if that does become much more dense with heather, it really will struggle to continue growing and creeping and crawling through those plants. So yes, competitors, mainly other dwarf shrubs that can really take over a space quite quickly.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. So there's a question about the risks, if any, but I suppose there's always risks in this sort of work of translocation. For example, do you tend to keep patches in D-side and space size separate to prevent any risk of disease spreading or localized issues, or any other risks that come up as part of translocations?
Yes, we do. So actually, what we've tried to do, mostly for the survival of the twin flower, is that we have been keeping any cuttings that we've been collecting from D-side will stay within D-side and will be planted within D-side, and those from Speyside will stay within that area and be planted within that area. So even things like the growing on from home, we've tried to keep that as close to their original patches as possible, because we found that even slight climatic changes can really be detrimental to them. So if you say brought cuttings from Strathspey to the coast, just that slight climatic difference can have quite an impact on twinflower. Whereas if you have it in the garden of a volunteer that's just down the road, then you know it's got very similar conditions, other than the fact that it's in a garden as opposed to a pine wood, just for that temporary period. So we've been keeping them separate in that sense. But in terms of risks, I suppose, if you're considering kind of biosecurity risks, what we do is when we collect cuttings, we pot them into compost initially, so that there's not anything being brought out of that soil that they're currently in. So you're not transporting anything from one site directly to another, or one site into a garden or whatnot. So we always use compost to start with, just to have a fresh, clean plate for getting those cuttings going. And then it's only further down the line that we'll repot them into soils from the sites that they're going to end up in. So because it's coming from the sites where they literally will be planted, there's quite low risk there as well in terms of diseases and spreads. And of course, while they're in gardens, we do some, de-weeding if anything does find its way in there. But generally they've been quite good growing on from home.
Absolutely, yeah. I suppose there's always risks inevitably in growing on a plant and then putting it in a new environment, the risk of actually losing parts of the twinflower. And that's one of the advantages of growing them on, because if you cut them and then put them straight into a new habitat, there can be quite a lot of danger of losing a lot of those individuals, especially if you have bad weather. For example, you get dry weather. So I suppose by growing on, we're trying to mitigate for that risk of losing these individuals through cuttings collection. Cool, thank you. Here's a quick question: does it grow in Canada? I was reading a little bit about that. It's actually a separate subspecies in North America, but it's kind of a holarctic, I think, is the description. But I believe it is in the US and possibly Canada. I'm not 100% on Canada specifically, but presumably Canada as well. Is there any evidence of self-pollination, Keilidih? You want to cover that one?
Yeah, there was research done into this, and it's really it's not self-compatible. So it can't self-pollinate, but it does spread vegetatively. So even without that pollination, it is able to grow and survive to an extent. But because it's not getting that genetic variation through from the pollination, it does just become weaker and weaker a plant, unfortunately. So no, it doesn't self-pollinate.
That leads us neatly onto our next question then. Are we doing genetic analysis of the populations of twinflower?
So we aren't specifically at the moment. We will be doing some for a few of our populations that we just need a little bit extra information on. But there has been previous genetic studies done on twinflower across most of the cairngorms. So really seeing how closely related various patches and woodlands are. And the outcome of that, really simplified, was that each woodland was essentially its own unique clone in most cases, unless some plant material had been moved. So really, when we've come to collect material, we've collected from separate woodlands, samples from quite spread out separate woodlands to ensure that they are genetically unique clones in themselves.
So as a question, is there parallel work going on to re-establish Caledonia forest to extend potential habitat for twinflower and other specialist species?
Yeah, there's various works through the park to try and I guess, protect any remaining Caledonian pine forests. And there is new planting happening in various areas that will hopefully eventually become over time. But it's just a long process at the moment. So really, particularly our work is with existing sites that we know are managed managed in a suitable way for Twinflower, and will be for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So it's really, when we come to pick a site, knowing that it's not just the immediate here and now that it suits for that it's really going to sustain as long as possible for these plants.
Cool. Apologies for the dog there.
Just saying hello.
Yeah, of course. So it's interesting as well, I think, to highlight the age, the time aspect of that there, isn't it? Because the twinflower and a lot of the other rare species that you find in Caledonia pine woodlands, such as one-flower wintergreen, are very specifically associated with older growth pine woodland. So it's very difficult to get, expansion of that habitat with those species over any sort of management period. So you're looking at very long periods of time, but it's all being considered. I think the park and many other organizations are looking at how to kind of recover and expand. But a lot of it's about protecting what we have as well, of course, as you mentioned. Cool. And then one final question, which is maybe quite a challenging one. Are there any mycorrhizal fungi associated with twinflower growth?
I'm not sure about specific fungal associations, but certainly it does have very, very close associations with those old Caledonian pine woods. We find it quite often growing at the base of tree trunks, or really going over mossy hummocks, and that close association with particular types of moss as well. So there is those close associations that are quite critical to where they're becoming established. But in terms of fungi, I'm not too sure. Sorry, I can look into that further and send any FAQs around.
Yeah, absolutely. As many things, I think more research needed. It's very, very still very early days for a lot of mycorrhizal associations. I mean, we were having a lot of chat about that yesterday in our wax cap conversation too. Just how much isn't known about fungi. It's yes, there's a lot to it. Cool. Well, I think that's all the questions there then. So again, thank you very much, Keilidih, for the wonderful presentation. And thanks very much, everyone else, for joining us. It's been absolutely lovely to have so many people attended and so many interesting and active questions there as well. So thank you very much. Yeah, I've got a post in chat about sending links around afterwards. I'll double check what communication we have afterwards, but I think maybe mailing lists and things like that might be the easiest way to get that round. So I'll follow up about that. But yes, I think that's all done there. So thanks very much for joining us, folks, and see you later. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, everyone.